This man may look like a comedian, but he's actually one of the deadliest assassins in the US, mercilessly killing anyone in his path. His calm demeanor seems to trigger murder wherever he goes. Although he is a cold-blooded assassin, he is surprisingly principled. He decides his victims' fates with a coin toss. Guess right, you're spared. Guess wrong, it's an early trip to the underworld. The story of this bizarre hitman has many twists and turns. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel it. His name is Anton Chigurh. Just hours before, he was being escorted to the station by a police officer. However, while the officer was distracted on a call, Chigurh used handcuffs to strangle him. Despite struggling desperately, the unfortunate officer succumbed to his injuries. But the killing didn't stop there. Chigurh quickly stole the police car and forced an innocent bystander to pull over. "Step out of your car, please," he says with a courteous but terrifying smile, and then swiftly finishes his job once he has his cattle stungun right on the forehead of the unfortunate guy. After that, Chigurh went to a convenience store. He asked the store owner what time he closed up, and the friendly owner replied that he could close whenever he liked. "What time do you go to bed?" "Oh, whenever my eyelids decide it's bedtime." Chigurh then realized that this guy lived without any rules, so he decided to flip a coin and make the store owner choose. For Chigurh, a wrong choice meant a one-way ticket to the afterlife. Fortunately, the owner guessed correctly and spared his life. Elsewhere, Llewellyn Moss, a Vietnam War veteran and welder, one day, while hunting and having seen no deer, he decides to head back when he suddenly discovers a trail of blood and spots a hunting dog in the distance. Moss kept moving through the desert, but his curiosity was piqued when he found the aftermath of a brutal shootout. Notorious gangsters lay bloodied on the ground, and a hunting dog's corpse was among them. Moss then discovered a badly injured man who was still alive. Staying cautious, Moss confiscated the weapons in the vehicle while the man repeatedly asked for water, which Moss hadn't brought. He found a stash of drugs in the back of the vehicle and guessed there had been a failed deal. With the drugs there, where was the money? Moss's instincts told him someone else might still have it. Looking through his binoculars, Moss spotted a man leaning against a tree. Sensing danger, he stayed hidden and watched for several hours to see if the man made any move. Moss went over to check and found that the man had been killed. Next to him was a suitcase containing about $2 million. So, Moss took the money and even hid it from his wife when he got home. But as night fell, he found himself unable to sleep. To ease his guilt, he decided to return with some water for the man from earlier. Moss parked on a hill and walked down to the scene. The window was broken and the man was dead, apparently shot by someone. Suddenly, Moss saw someone appearing on the hill. Seeing this, he quickly found a place to hide, but they soon spotted him and started shooting wildly. With no other options, Moss fled as fast as he could, but they kept on pursuing him relentlessly. Unfortunately, Moss took a bullet in the shoulder, but still managed to escape towards the river. Instead of following him, they released a trained dog to track him down. Exhausted, he struggled through the river, reloaded his gun, and shot the attacking dog. Though he escaped, he suffered a serious shoulder injury. Suspecting they wouldn't let him go, he hurried home to bandage his wound and urged his wife to pack up and leave the city. Meanwhile, Chigurh arrived at the scene with two other hitmen from the same organization. Noticing Moss's car, Chigurh removed its identification to trace him. The hitman handed Chigurh a tracking device, revealing that the briefcase had a GPS. "You two are done here. I'll handle the rest," Chigurh said. The next morning, two police officers arrived at the scene, only to find bodies scattered everywhere. With his extensive experience, Sheriff Ed Tom Bell quickly suspected a drug deal gone wrong. Meanwhile, hitman Chigurh tracked Moss's address using the car registration. Unfortunately for him, the house was completely empty. Frustrated, Chigurh sat down to think, but then noticed a letter on the floor that revealed the name of his target. Chigurh didn't stop there. He tried to get information from the local manager. Although she knew something, she refused to share because she wasn't authorized to disclose residents' information. Despite not getting the answers he wanted, Chigurh didn't harm her, showing a clear respect for those who follow the rules. Moss put his wife on a bus to leave the city, but he stayed behind, telling her he had some unfinished business to take care of. Meanwhile, two police officers arrived at Moss's house and immediately knew Chigurh had been there. The door showed clear marks from Chigurh's cattle gun, a weapon the police were all too familiar with. Once again, they found themselves a step behind him. At this point, Moss arrived at a hotel, rented a private room, pried open the air vent, and quickly hid the $1 million briefcase inside. Recognizing the danger, Moss bought more weapons for protection. To ensure better handling, he even shortened the gun barrel. After loading his gun, he rented an additional room next to his original one. At this point, Chigurh roamed the city, determined to locate the money and Moss. Suddenly, his tracking device lit up, indicating that his target was nearby. Following the signal, Chigurh found his way to the hotel. He quickly identified the room with the strongest signal, rented a room next to it, and began assembling his homemade heavy weaponry for the attack. However, he was unaware that Moss had already rented a different room. Chigurh used his cattle gun to break into the room and swiftly dispatched one of the men with 2 shots. Another man attempted to sneak up, but unfortunately, his skills were still lacking. The sound of gunfire alerted Moss to the situation. Chigurh discovered one of the frightened men hiding in the bathtub and without hesitation took him out on the spot. It turned out these inexperienced hitmen had been sent by the crime boss to track down Moss. Chigurh searched the room but couldn't find the briefcase. With his ruthless instincts, he realized something was off and used a coin to open the ventilation cover. However, it was too late. The briefcase had already been moved to Moss's room. Meanwhile, the crime boss, aware of Chigurh's unstable and unpredictable nature, decided to hire another hitman to find the briefcase. Little did he know, this decision would lead to an impending tragedy. Back with Moss, he moved to another hotel, alerted by the gunfire from Chigurh. Knowing that Chigurh had a keen sense of tracking, almost like a hunting dog, Moss decided to give the hotel owner a little extra money and asked him to notify him if anyone came to rent a room. After tossing and turning, Moss realized why Chigurh was able to track him down. The briefcase had been equipped with a GPS device, and it was likely that Chigurh was on his way to the new hotel. So, Moss quietly prepared his gear and got ready to defend himself in case the worst happened. As expected, Moss saw a shadow outside the door and heard the lock being breached by a gas canister. Without hesitation, he fired a burst of buckshot towards the door and quickly jumped out of the window to escape. He was puzzled as to why the hotel owner hadn't notified him, only to discover that Chigurh had killed him. Realizing things were getting worse, Moss quickly made his way through the night. Unfortunately, he was hit by a bullet in the side, but he kept moving. When he saw a vehicle passing by, he desperately tried to hitch a ride. However, before he could even get in, the driver was killed on the spot. Next came a torrent of chaos and destruction. With limited visibility, Moss lost control of the vehicle. With no other options, he decided to hold his ground and face Chigurh head-on. Through the car window, Moss saw that Chigurh was getting closer. Determined, Moss opened fire relentlessly in his direction. Because Chigurh was moving faster than he could shoot, he dropped his gun on the road. Could the tide of the fight be turning? However, Moss searched around but found nothing. Noticing the fresh blood on the ground, Moss realized that Chigurh was also seriously injured. Moss then drove to the border, where he bought a shirt from some young men to cover his blood-stained wound. The injury was worsening, and the briefcase was weighing him down. So, he threw the briefcase over the fence and staggered through the border, barely able to move. When Moss opened his eyes, he saw a group of Border Patrol agents performing. He handed them some money and asked them to take him to the hospital. Meanwhile, Chigurh, being a wanted criminal, couldn't risk going to a hospital. Instead, he caused a commotion by setting off an explosion to distract the public, then quickly stole the medication he needed. Chigurh carefully laid out a raincoat on the ground. His leg continued to bleed profusely, and his pants were stuck with dried blood, which he had to cut with scissors. He then crafted his own treatment and, once done, administered a dose of painkillers to himself. Meanwhile, after Moss was taken to the hospital and came to, he found himself face to face with another hitman, Carson Wells. It turned out that Wells was sent by the crime boss and was well informed about everything Moss had been through. To Moss's surprise, Wells even knew the location of his wife. Not wanting his wife to be in danger, Moss reluctantly revealed the location of the briefcase. Shortly afterward, Wells found the briefcase on the other side of the fence. Unfortunately for Wells, he was being watched by Chigurh, who quickly subdued him. Wells then proposed a deal. He would reveal the location of the briefcase if Chigurh promised to let him go unharmed. However, Chigurh wasn't interested in making a deal. He was convinced that what was rightfully his would eventually come to him. Now, all Chigurh needed to do was kill Wells to get the money. Suddenly, the phone rang just as Wells was executed on the spot. It turned out the caller was Moss. Chigurh wasted no time and got straight to the point. He made a deal with Moss. Chigurh wanted him to bring the money to him, or else he would kill Moss's wife that day. Clearly, this was an offer Moss couldn't refuse. Furious at Chigurh's audacity, Moss was boiling with anger. Yet, despite the rage, he determined to face Anton to the bitter end. Moss then called his wife, urging her to flee the country. "It's the only way you'll be safe," he insisted. He promised her that once he dealt with Chigurh, he would return to her. At the same time, Chigurh broke through the door and shot the boss with a cattle stun gun. Although the boss hired Chigurh for the briefcase, he also sent another hitman, Carson Wells. This was a clear breach of the rules. The man behind was terrified and asked, "Are you going to shoot me?" "It depends on which side of the coin you pick," Chigurh replied. Meanwhile, Moss's family was heading to the airport. Unaware, they were being followed by hitmen who were waiting for Moss to arrive. Fearing something was wrong, Moss's wife called the sheriff. When he arrived, he heard gunfire and saw the hitmen frantically trying to escape, having apparently just carried out a robbery. Inside, the sheriff found Moss dead. Once again, he had arrived too late, beaten by the criminals. That night, the sheriff returned to Moss's hideout, convinced that the criminals would come back to the scene. He was right, but it wasn't Moss's killers who returned. It was Chigurh, the one hunting Moss. His purpose was clear. He was there to retrieve the $2 million. Hearing the news, his wife was heartbroken, unable to grasp why death had come for him. She returned home in sorrow, only to find Chigurh already waiting for her. Chigurh had once warned Moss that if the briefcase wasn't handed over, he'd kill his wife. Now that the money had been taken by others, and being a man of his word, Chigurh was there to carry out his promise. His wife argued that killing wasn't necessary. "I already said I would," Chigurh replied. He then flipped a coin, forcing her to choose, but she firmly refused to play his game. As he stepped out of the house, Chigurh checked the soles of his shoes for blood. Do you think she met her fate at his hands? Chigurh then left, staying alert. Suddenly, a car ran a red light and crashed into him. When Chigurh emerged, his face was covered in blood and his arm bone was sticking out. He scrounged up a few bucks to buy a kid's shirt and patched himself up. As the police sirens grew louder, he slowly left the scene. Chigurh, the embodiment of chaos and fate, has vanished, leaving behind confusion and pain for those who remain. The story's abrupt ending and moral ambiguity challenge us to reflect on the nature of justice and the randomness of violence. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the dark tales of the American West. Catch you in the next video.